Today, we're going to take a look at Rhaenys, Viserys, Daemon, and Emma's eldest aunt, the original Daenerys Targaryen. Daenerys' life story is a tragic one, so there's that. More importantly, her life story speaks to one of the most important and highly debated topics, the blood of the dragon. Good Queen Alysanne gave birth to 13 children, 7 of which were girls. Their first child was a boy named Aegon. Unfortunately, the young prince had come too early. Small and frail, he died 3 days after birth. So bereft was Queen Alysanne that the maesters feared for her life as well. Forever after, she blamed her son's death on the women who had attacked her at Maidenpool. Had she been allowed to bathe in the healing waters of Jonquil's pool, she would say, Prince Aegon would have lived. The next year, Queen Alysanne gave birth to a strong and healthy child, a girl she named Daenerys. The king was at Stony Sept when word reached him. He mounted Vermithor and flew back to King's Landing at once. Though Jaehaerys had hoped for another son to follow him upon the Iron Throne, it was plain to see that he doted on his daughter from the moment he first took her in his arms. King Jaehaerys and Queen Alysanne were happy for a time, but then their mother died in childbirth. Having lost her mother, Alysanne found solace in her daughter, Daenerys. Though not quite a year and a half old, Princess Daenerys had been talking, after a fashion, since well before her first name day, and had gotten past crawling, lurching, and walking into running. She is in a great hurry, this one, her wet nurse told the queen. The little princess was a happy child, endlessly curious and utterly fearless, a delight to all who knew her. She so enchanted Alysanne that, for a time, her grace even began to eschew council sessions, preferring to spend her days playing with her daughter and reading her stories that her own mother had once read to her. She is so clever, she will be reading to me before long, she told the king. She is going to be a great queen. I know it. In 55 AC, King Jaehaerys and the people of Westeros were thrilled to learn that Queen Alysanne was once again with child. Princess Daenerys shared their delight, though she told her mother in firm terms that she wanted a little sister. You sound like a queen already, laying down the law, her mother told her, laughing. The loss of Prince Aegon after only 3 days of life still weighed heavily upon her grace. Rather than subject herself to the rigors of travel or the demands of life at court, the queen sought the quiet of the ancient seat of her house, where her duties would be few. That is why Queen Alysanne chose to leave King's Landing for Dragonstone, there to await the birth of her child. Alysanne gave birth to a boy, clean-limbed and healthy, with eyes as pale as lilac. His hair, when it came in, was pale as well, shining like white gold, a color rare even in Valyria of old. Jaehaerys named him Aemon. Daenerys will be cross with me, Alysanne said as she put the princeling to her breast. She was most insistent on wanting a sister. Jaehaerys laughed at that and said, next time. That night, at Alysanne's suggestion, he placed a dragon's egg in the prince's cradle. Over time, Princess Daenerys warmed to her brother, Aemon, though she still wanted a little sister. In 57 AC, Jaehaerys and his queen found cause to rejoice again when the gods blessed them with another son. Baelon he was named. Only 2 days before his birth, the white ravens had flown from the citadel to announce the arrival of spring, so Baelon was immediately dubbed the Spring Prince. Prince Aemon was 2 when his brother was born, Prince Daenerys 4. The two were little alike. The princess was a lively, laughing child who bounced around the Red Keep day and night, flying everywhere on a broomstick dragon that had become her favorite toy. Mud-spattered and grass-stained, she was a trial to her mother and her maids alike, for they were always losing track of her. The young princes loved their sister, to distraction it was plain to see, and Daenerys delighted in the boys, especially in telling them what to do. Grand Maester Bennifer noted something else, however. Jaehaerys loved all 3 children fiercely, but from the moment Aemon was born, the king began to speak of him as his heir, to Queen Alysanne's displeasure. Daenerys is older, she would remind his grace. She is first in line. She should be queen. The king would never disagree, except to say, she shall be queen. When she and Aemon marry, they will rule together just as we have. But Bennifer could see that the king's words did not entirely please the queen, as he noted in his letters. As the 58th year after Aegon's conquest drew to a close, King Jaehaerys celebrated the 10th anniversary of his coronation at the starry Sept of Old Town. The gods had blessed the 2 of them with 3 strong children, 2 splendid young princes, and a princess who was the darling of the realm. In their decade of rule, they had known grief and horror, betrayal and conflict, and the death of loved ones. But they had weathered the storms and survived the tragedies and emerged stronger and better from all they had endured. Their accomplishments were undeniable. The Seven Kingdoms were at peace and more prosperous than they had been in living memory. It was a time for celebration, and celebrate they did, with a tourney at King's Landing on the anniversary of the king's coronation. It was a time for warm embraces, for smiles, for toast and reconciliations, for renewing old friendships and making new ones, for laughter and kisses. It was a good time, a golden autumn, a time of peace and plenty. But winter was coming. The winter of 59 to 60 AC was an exceptionally cruel one. The north was hit first and hardest as crops died in the field, streams froze and bitter winds came howling over the wall. Famine spread across the land, and old men bade farewell to their children and went out into the snow to die, so their kin might live. Harvests failed in the riverlands, the westerlands, and the Vale as well, and even down into the Reach. Those who had food began to hoard, and all across the Seven Kingdoms, the price of bread began to rise. The price of meat rose even faster, and in the towns and cities, fruits and vegetables all but disappeared. And then the Shivers came, and the stranger walked the land. The marks of the disease were well known. It began simply enough, with a chill. Victims would complain of being cold, throw a fresh log on the fire, huddle under a blanket or a pile of furs. Some would call for hot soup, milled wine, or, against all reason, beer. Neither blankets nor soups could stay the progress of the pestilence. Soon the shivering would begin. Mild at first, a trembling, a shudder, but inexorably growing worse. Goose prickles would march up and down the victim's limbs like conquering armies. By then, the afflicted would be shivering so violently that their teeth would chatter and their hands and feet would begin to convulse and twitch. When the victim's lips turned blue and he began to cough up blood, the end was nigh. Once the first chill was felt, the course of the shivers was swift. Death would come within a day, and no more than one victim in every 5 recovered. All across the Seven Kingdoms, the noble and humble alike were struck down. The old and the young were most at risk, but men and women in the prime of their lives were not spared. The roll of those taken included the greatest of lords, the noblest of ladies, the most valiant of knights. The great port city of Old Town was especially hard hit, losing a quarter of its population. The High Septon died, 200 of the most devout, and fully a third of the archmaesters, maesters, acolytes, and novices at the citadel. In all the realm, no place was as sorely afflicted as King's Landing was in 59 AC. Amongst the dead were 2 knights of the King's Guard, 3 lords of the council, and Carl Corbray, commander of the City Watch. With their commander dead and many of the City Watch stricken and shivering, the streets and alleys of King's Landing fell prey to lawlessness and license. Shops were looted, women raped, men robbed and killed for no crime but walking down the wrong street at the wrong time. The old year ended and a new year began, but there were few celebrations anywhere in Westeros to mark the coming of the 60th year since Aegon's conquest. A year before, great bonfires had been lit in public squares, and men and women had danced around them, drinking and laughing whilst bells rang in the new year. 1 year later, the fires were consuming corpses and the bells were tolling out the dead. The streets of King's Landing were empty, especially by night. The alleyways were deep in snow and icicles hung down from the rooftops, long as spears. Atop Aegon's high hill, King Jaehaerys ordered the gates of the Red Keep closed and barred, and doubled the watch on the castle walls. He and his queen and their children attended sunset services at the castle sept, prepared to Maegor's holdfast for a modest meal, and then retired to bed. It was the hour of the owl when Queen Alysanne was awoken by her daughter, shaking her gently by the arm. "Mother," Princess Daenerys said, "I'm cold." Daenerys Targaryen was the darling of the realm, and all that could be done for any man was done for her. There were prayers and poultices, hot soups and scalding baths, blankets and furs and hot stones, nettle tea. The princess was 6, and years past being waned, but a wet nurse was summoned, for there were some who believed that mother's milk could cure the shivers. Maesters came and went, septons and septas prayed. The king commanded that 100 new rat catchers be hired at once and offered a silver stag for every dead rat, gray or black. Daenerys wanted her kitten, and her kitten was brought to her, though as her shivering grew more violent, it squirmed from her grasp and scratched her hand. Near dawn, Jaehaerys bolted to his feet, shouting that a dragon was needed, that his daughter must have a dragon, and ravens took wing for Dragonstone, instructing the dragon keepers there to bring a hatchling to the Red Keep at once. none of it mattered. A day and a half after she had woken her mother from sleep, complaining of feeling cold, the little princess was dead. The king and the queen were not the only parents to lose a child to the Shivers. Thousands of others, highborn and low, knew the same pain that winter. For Jaehaerys and Alysanne, however, the death of their beloved daughter must have seemed especially cruel, for it struck at the very heart of the doctrine of exceptionalism. Princess Daenerys had been Targaryen on both sides, with the blood of old Valyria running pure through her veins, and those of Valyrian descent were not like other men. Targaryens had purple eyes and hair of gold and silver. They ruled the sky on dragons. The doctrines of the faith and the prohibitions against incest did not apply to them, and they did not get sick. Since Aenar the Exile first staked his claim to Dragonstone, that had been known. Targaryens did not die of pox or the bloody flux. They were not afflicted with red spots or brown leg or the shaking sickness. They would not succumb to wormbone or clotted lung or sour gut or any of the myriad pestilences and contagions that the gods, for reasons of their own, see fit to loose on mortal men and women. There was fire in the blood of the dragon, it was reasoned, a purifying fire that burned out all such plagues. It was unthinkable that a pure-born princess should die shivering as if she were some common child. And yet, she had. Even as they mourned for her and the sweet soul she had been, Jaehaerys and Alysanne must also have been confronting that awful realization. Mayhaps the Targaryens were not so close to gods as they had believed. Mayhaps, in the end, they too were only men.